Okay, I think we will go ahead and get started. I know people are still coming in, but a lot of the beginning is just kind of logistics anyway, so um, folks won't miss much. So today we have Ashly Winkle and Mary Springer from the Literacy Council of Tyler, Texas, and they're going to be talking about to us about going the distance, which is what they're calling their efforts to move from face-to-face classes to doing distance learning, and they've got a lot of great information to share with you today. Just some of the logistics. We are recording. You'll get a follow-up email on Monday. It will have a link to the recording. It'll have links to websites, and we've started putting those into a resources document. So we try to capture all of the websites that the presenters and other participants mentioned during the webinar. Try to put them all in one document so they're easy for you to find. Ashly and Mary have agreed to share their PowerPoint, so that'll be attached. We'll have a transcript of the chat and the Q&A functions, and then we'll also have a link to the certificate. And I apologize, those of you who tried to download the certificate from last week. I don't know what happened. There was a little box that got checked, and instead of producing a nice certificate, it kind of took each element of the certificate and put it on a single page. So a couple of you alerted me to what had happened. I went back and changed it. So that certificate is in good shape now. So if you tried to print your certificate out last week and it wasn't working, you can go back to that link and print it out, and it should print out nicely. Just to remind you, we're going to ask that you use the chat function. If you're having any technical issues, the sound is going in and out, you're having trouble seeing the screen or anything like that, please post that into the chat feature, and we'll keep an eye out for those things. The chat is where we'll also post the links that kind of come up in the presentation, so you can kind of click on those and launch them and kind of look at the websites that that Mary and Ashly are talking about as they're going along. We're going to ask that you use the Q&A feature to post your questions to the presenters having to do with the content of what they're talking about. And Ashly and Mary have both agreed to kind of stay on after the webinar is over, so past the top of the hour. So we will kind of call it in to the webinar. We'll invite people to stay on after the top of the hour if they want to listen to Mary and Ashly's responses, but they've agreed to stay on so that we can go through everybody's questions and get everything answered. So thank you, Ashly and Mary, for being so generous with your time. We've got a couple more of these webinars coming up. So we've got one from Literacy Source in Seattle, and then one from Washtenaw Literacy. Again, kind of our emails go out. I think they're going out pretty consistently on Wednesdays now with the registration link. So keep an eye out for those. We are working on finalizing a distance learning webinar for corrections, and I think I've got to talk to a couple of more panelists, and then I think we'll kind of finalize our panel, and my goal is to have it on that Friday after the 19th, which I think is like the 26th or 27th, the 26th. And then after that corrections webinar, we're going to take a break for the month of July. So we've been doing these kind of every week. It's we love doing them. They've been very helpful, but we want to take a break and kind of check in and make sure that they're still useful to people. So to help us kind of check with that, I've got a couple of polls. So I'm going to launch one, and it's just for us to get a sense of where you are in this whole kind of implementing distance learning through COVID process. So you'll see I'm launching the poll now, and you'll see the question is, when do you plan to start having face-to-face classes again? And so there's some months, and there's also some options down at the bottom of we don't know, and we do know, we don't know, but we know it's not going to be this year. So if you'll take, I'm going to leave that up for about a minute or so, and if you'll take some time to fill that out, we would really appreciate it. And that's just going to help us kind of see where folks are in this process. And then I have one more poll. So while you guys are responding to that, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide, which is just to let you know that on ProLiteracy Education Network is just one of the many places where we are posting the recordings to these webinars. We're also going through, and the resources that come up during these webinars, we're making them available on Education Network as well. We've created a whole section for distance learning resources. If you create an account on Education Network, it's free to do so. And then when you get onto that, after you've created an account and you get on that welcome page, you'll see a big banner across the top for distance learning resources, and you can click on that, and you'll see the recordings, you'll see some lesson plans that you can use with students, you'll see resources that have come up in this particular thing. And so we do have somebody that's already posted in the Q&A that they're interested in the distance learning and corrections webinar. So everybody that's attended these, we kind of draw our mailing list from past attendees and people that are on our Education Network site, as well as our member organization. So whoever posted that, the fact that you are attending this one means that you'll get an invitation to the corrections webinar when we get that scheduled. Okay, looks like kind of the polling has kind of slowed down the responses, and it looks like for the most part people don't know when they're going to start having face-to-face classes again. So few people, about 9% of you, are looking at opening up in July. Same thing in August. I'm gonna actually share these results with you, so you should be able to see this. So I'm actually kind of surprised, so that so many of you just don't know when you're going to open up. So it seems like things are still in flux quite a bit. So I'm going to stop sharing this poll, and I have one more. So let's do that one. All right, so this one is a poll. So I said we were going to kind of take a break on the webinars in July, start them back up in August. And so this one is to help us kind of figure out where our focus should be on those August webinars when we start back up in August. So you'll see the question is, when we continue hosting webinars, meaning when we start back up in August, would you prefer they focus on distance learning, opening literacy programs back up, both? And what I mean by opening literacy programs back up, I mean kind of dealing with policy procedures, how people are kind of handling the restrictions that they might have on classroom size and safety issues and things like that. Other topics, and if you have other topics that you'd like to see us offer webinars on, I'm just going to ask you to post those sometime during the webinar today. So you don't have to do it right away. But if you have other topics that you're interested in, just post those in the chat. When we download that chat, we'll be able to pull those off, and that'll give us some ideas of what to do when we start back up in August. And I'll give folks about another 30 seconds to finish responding. All right, it looks like the responses have slowed down, so I'm going to call time on the poll. Thank you guys for responding, and I'll share the responses with you here. So it looks like about 19–20% for distance learning, about 10% for opening back up, 68, almost 70% for both. So it looks like people really would appreciate kind of having both of those topics dealt with. So maybe what we'll do is we'll kind of alternate between the two of them. We'll see if we can find some presenters, go back and find some people that are opening back up and are willing to share their experiences. And if people are kind of starting to do that in July and August, we'll let them get those in place and then kind of draw on their expertise. And then again, those kind of other topics that you're interested in, just post those in the chat room. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing the results and just say thank you again for letting us know what you would like and what would be helpful. And I'm going to turn things over to Ashly and Mary. So Ashly is the Director of Distance Learning for the Literacy Council of Tyler, Texas. And Mary is the high school equivalency literacy instructor. So Ashly and Mary, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let you guys stop sharing yours. I'm also going to unmute both of you.
Okay, here we are. Give me 1 second. I'm going to share my screen. And in classic tradition, my dog decided to start barking right when this started. So if you hear that, I'm sorry. Happens during class. It happens during presentations. I can't seem to help it. All right, give me just 1 second here. And kind of just talking while I'm waiting to pull this up about when you're opening up. We are going to try it, part of it in July ourselves. We don't know what that looks like yet, but we are keeping the remote lessons. Something that we found super interesting today, or not today, this week, was we called every single student we have and asked them if they prefer remote classes or face-to-face classes. And we got very interesting responses. Every single person who is currently in a remote class wants to continue in the remote class. So we didn't see that one coming. And I don't know, and I did hear from another program this morning in a meeting that they had a similar experience. So it's kind of a really crazy world we're in right now. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so this is adult ed during the coronavirus, how the Literacy Council of Tyler handled going the distance. Who we are is we're Literacy Council of Tyler, and we are located in Tyler, Texas, which if you don't know where that is, that's basically a couple hours north of Dallas. We're pretty close to the Louisiana border, about 2 hours from there. But we are a nonprofit adult education literacy program. We're made up of, we're also the head of a consortium of about 11 different programs and sites around East Texas. We offer ESL, HSE, college transition, and career pathways. And we serve about 2,500 students per year altogether around our area. This is Mary Springer. We both, like most adult educators, we have a bunch of roles that we juggle, but she is an HSE teacher, college prep, transition coordinator, and a few other things I think as well. And my counselor is what I've been calling her lately. She keeps me sane, and she's been great to collaborate with. My name is Ashly Winkle. I am currently the Director of Distance Learning, PD Coordinator. I recently became a Journeyman 2 Tech Coach, and I am still teaching one GED or HSE class, and I'm also a trainer. So basically what we're trying to do today is we kind of want to give you a presentation on two perspectives of when this whole crazy world started. The transition from the traditional to the remote classroom. And from one perspective is mine, where I'm a tech coach. So I'm very comfortable with technology. So everybody and my students already use technology. So my students are comfortable with technology as well. So everybody kind of made the assumption that this would be an easy transition for me. I'm going to tell you that's not the truth. And Mary's side of it is she does use technology, but not the same way that I do. So we kind of have completely different experiences here and what our processes were from the very beginning when we found out. So I'm going to start with me. My biggest thing is I literally found out this was going down like while I was on spring break. So I got rid of spring break completely. That did not happen. So I had to immediately start thinking about how will I turn my traditional class into a virtual class? Because even though I am a technology person, I couldn't see it. I just could, and I do a lot of webinars and I still couldn't see it. You'd think I could see it. I couldn't see it. I just couldn't visualize it. And my other guiding question was really, how can I lead and help the other teachers to do the same, especially the teachers who are not comfortable with technology, which probably means they have students who are not comfortable with technology. But we couldn't just stop, because the biggest thing that kept going through my head is, if we don't have hours, we probably don't have jobs. And that was a big fear of mine. And I was worried for the students, I was worried for the staff and everybody else. So I knew we had to act, and we had to act quickly. So my solution really in the beginning, and continues forever obviously, was to research. Anything and everything I could get my hands on, go to the people that I already know. One of them was on here 2 weeks ago, my mentor, Dr. Glenda Rose, because she had 20 years experience in this. Me, not so much. I was a distance learning teacher, not a remote teacher. And I definitely didn't know, I mean, I had attended Zoom sessions. I had even presented on Zoom sessions, but I had never moderated a Zoom session. And I didn't know what the best tools were. I did not know anything about doing this. So I looked into best practices in remote and distance learning, best tech tools to use with mobile devices and remote classes, and then also best strategies to help teachers and students who are not comfortable with technology. Basically, I did a lot of webinars and a lot of reading and didn't sleep, I'm pretty sure, for at least 2 weeks. Mary, I'm gonna let you continue on your portion.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Ashly. And I'm probably coming from the perspective that many of you are coming from, where either you don't use much technology in the classroom at all. I kind of thought that I did. I thought I was a pretty tech person because I met in a computer lab and we worked on the computers as part of our lessons and things like that. But when all of this happened, I realized how little I did in the class that could translate into a virtual lesson. You know, all of this, again, we were on spring break when all of this happened in our area in Texas. And so we had already kind of been away from our students for a little while. And then it was like our whole world turned upside down. It was just kind of overwhelming for everyone. I'm a single mother of 4 boys. So I understood the overwhelming feeling that our students were having, trying to now help their students with their work, worrying about their job and their bills and all of those things that I was also worried about. So reaction was just, how do I stay connected with my students? How do I find out how they're doing during this time? And then, of course, how do we keep giving them opportunities to learn throughout this time? So based on that, some of the things that I did, you know, I said, okay, we're going to communicate, we're going to take it slow, and we're going to be flexible in all of this. So I just kind of, I tell many of my students, because I do primarily teach math, which is a little overwhelming for students. So I always tell my students, it's okay to be overwhelmed. It's okay to be a little confused. And so we kind of just, that first two to 3 weeks, I really just spent really getting in touch with all of my students, making sure they were okay physically, emotionally. I helped them with their students' homework. I got them information, and we did, as an organization, How do you file for unemployment? What are the food banks that are offering? So all of those things to kind of just meet kind of their physical needs, their emotional needs that they were going through. And kind of my mantra during that time was just survive together. Hey, we're going to survive this together. Excuse me, I have some allergies and Texas is bad for those. Then we kind of said, okay, we've done that. How are we going to start doing virtual classes with our students? I had never used Zoom before. I had done I had been in some things where they did not use Zoom, but other virtual like class or meeting type things. But I had never used Zoom before. So it was something that was totally foreign to me. So then I said, listen, I am going to learn before I leap into anything. I'm not going to start trying to do something that I'm not sure about, that I don't understand. So starting in April, the first 2 weeks of April, I did virtual office hours in Zoom where I offered my students, and I work with about 75 students that are directly my students, whether they were in class with me. I did math tutoring, and I also did a lot of kind of independent learning students that were getting ready to take their HSE tests. So I just said, I better know what I'm doing before I get into asking them to join me. So we just had different times during the days that I just opened up the Zoom, sent everybody a link, and if they needed to come in and just talk, tell me how they're doing, if they needed help with some of the resources that we already had available to them, if we needed to go over maybe some math problems they were working on or anything like that. And that just gave me a chance to practice on Zoom and get used to it and get them used to it so that they felt more comfortable and more familiar with it. And then I started actually doing lessons through Zoom, and we're going to get into that a little bit later, how that process went. But through all of that, I just continue to tell the students, do what you can when you can. It's not like a cookie cutter approach for every student. So if they could come to Zoom classes, that's great. If they couldn't, we offered them other things that they could do on their computer or over their phone, or packet pickups that we're going to talk about as well. So wherever they were, I had some students that had lost their jobs and were not working at all. I had some students that were working overtime because their job was asking them to work extra. And so I just couldn't say this is what everybody has to do because we're also different and individuals. So I started out slow, but then I really kind of fell in love with this whole idea of virtual classrooms and things like that. And so I kind of have evolved in where I started to where I am today. And I'm excited to continue this even when we get back to face-to-face classes.
Yeah, and really, I think as a program, our biggest thing that we did in those first couple of weeks was to keep in communication with the students. Contact them, talk to them. If nothing else, just keep talking to them. Figure out where they're at, what technology they have, that sort of a thing first, and before we knew. And then we slowly developed a plan, and the plan just kind of kept building week by week. So that's kind of what we're talking about. So going the distance, what we're going to talk a little bit about the digital lessons, but before I talk about that, I do want to say that in about this, I think we were in probably the second week. The first week we spent just communicating, trying to figure out what to do and how to do it and how to make it work and what tools to use. That was our biggest thing, is what tools to use that are going to really accommodate all teachers and students and not overwhelm anybody, because we're now in a technology world for the most part. That was one thing. And another thing though is, what do we do with the ones with limited internet? What do we do with the ones that don't have computer or internet? Those were the biggest challenges. So there were all these things we were just constantly problem solving over and over again. So I was, because I'm very brave sometimes, this was too brave maybe, because I was actually asked to do a presentation on Google Hangouts, which was kind of interesting for me because, let me tell you how much experience I had with that. Not very much. I had used it with one-on-one people before, it was fine. But I tried to do it with a class on the free version, not the Google Suite version. And it was a complete flaw. It was like, it didn't work. It didn't work at all. Like, it was a horrible night. But what I did is I just directed my students to to a program they're used to. I directed them to Google Classroom because they were familiar with it. So they went there and they had their assignment on there, which was on basically a tool that we're using constantly called Actively Learn, which, by the way, we're going to mention probably 5 or 6 tools at least today, and I am going to provide a resource list for all of these to you. I will kind of talk about what each thing is, but I will try not to get too into it. But Actively Learn has been a tool that the reading teachers like I am, we use pretty much religiously because it's highly interactive. It works well on the phone. It works well in our Zoom classes, and it just works well overall. But we're going to talk a little bit about digital lessons. So how do we keep lessons student-centered, engaging, and relevant in the remote classroom? And first, we're going to look at digital lessons from my perspective as pretty much a digital teacher. I was already doing digital lessons, so this should be a piece of cake for me, everybody thought. But this is what my classroom looked like. This is what I was used to. I was used to a classroom, yes, and I know I am a spoiled adult ed teacher. I have these big, beautiful computers, big, beautiful monitors. They can split their screen. They can work on 2 things at the same time. Right now, they're doing what is called a HyperDoc, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more in detail in a moment. But you can see they're collaborating. They're not playing on their phones. They're not messing around. They look like their brains hurt, and they did. That's what I was used to. But I'm also right there for them, and we can do things. I went from that to this, to a Zoom room. And I know we all are familiar with what this looks like at this point. And this was a complete nightmare for me because I am a technology person. But when I say a technology person, I like computers. I'm not a cell phone person. I need my cell phone. I use it all the time, but I had never used it for lessons. So I had a huge adaptation to go through myself. So it was kind of an interesting thing. So I don't know, some people may be more familiar with HyperDocs than they were in years past. I know that GED actually did a webinar, I think it was last week. They talked about it. I've been using HyperDocs for probably at least 4 years actually now. And I'm going to get into what they are. I mean, this could be an entire session on itself, so I'm not going to get too into it, but I'll give you the resources to explore because I actually made an entire website on it. But HyperDocs defined, if you're not familiar, is basically they're an interactive digital lesson that replaces the worksheet/lecture method of delivering instruction. So it used to be associated more with just Google Docs, but now because technology changes so often, you can do it with so many other tools. So I kind of changed the definition, but most HyperDocs are kind of based on a basic lesson plan. They're like a digital lesson plan template. So it takes all the normal elements of a great lesson that you might create, and it puts it into digital content, with the idea being that the student has an opportunity to engage, explore, apply, and you are able to assess their learning. And then at the end, you're even able to give them an extension section for those students that move quicker than others or might be more advanced than others, so you have an opportunity for differentiation. But this is just kind of to show you, this is like a template that just kind of guides you through. It tells you exactly what to do. You insert, you engage, you have your little hook, that sort of a thing. You have the students go out and explore a subject, so you're not just lecturing at them, you're having them actually go onto the internet, explore things like that. And then you explain, that might be where you do your modeling and that sort of a thing. And then, and this of course can be altered a little bit. I've changed mine a lot. You apply what they learn with practice, that sort of thing. They can share and collaborate. And then of course you reflect with like basically your exit ticket, that sort of thing. So what I like about this is so many things. They can work independently, we can work in groups, we can work as a class, we can do all of that. Or if the student misses a class, they always have access to this digital lesson that I have put on Google Classroom. And like I said, all of this I have on a website that I am going to share at the end. But that's what I was used to working with, is my point. Now the challenge now is the students are on a cell phone. And when you're doing this type of a lesson, you're going to end up with a lot of tabs open. They have to know how to maneuver through it. And I don't know what their cell phones handle. An example just to kind of show you what that template could turn into. I'm just going to kind of show briefly. You'll notice that I added different elements because we were going to read the story by Roald Dahl called Poison. And there was a lot of historical background. So I give them an opportunity to go to this Google slideshow. Oh no, that was history.com to get some background. And then they go to this little gallery walk. It's a digital one, so they could see what it was like. And then they reflect on what they learn, and you continue through the whole thing. You'll see that when they go to a vocabulary lesson. So before we do the reading, we do a little pre-reading to familiarize them with vocabulary through vocabulary.com. And then we do the actual reading on the website I mentioned, Actively Learn, which is it's very interactive reading. They add all these elements to the reading itself, so the student doesn't get to read everything until we know they understand. They go in sections and in videos and elements like that. And then they're just constantly coming back to the document throughout. As they go through the entire lesson, they do different elements, and you're basically taking them outside. You're taking them out to the world to explore what's going on and come back. And these lessons usually take me 4 weeks. So I plan it. It takes a little bit of time, but it's going to last for the whole month, and that's usually how my lessons have gone. Well, now it's a little different. Now we're in a remote world, so I decided to start using a different tool because it was easier for me. I do still share my lessons with the students on Google Classroom, just in case they want to do anything on their own. But instead, so this was my very first remote lesson, and it actually went surprisingly well. We decided to combine classes. So I have an HSE class, and Claire, who is actually here today, she has an ABE class. So that's kind of a challenge too. So now we're joining forces, and we've got different levels. But we wanted to be there for each other and help each other because we didn't know what we were doing. So I jumped in, and so I started with this. Now, a student could still do this on their own if they wanted to, but I decided I don't want them to go venturing out on too many websites or too many tools without me, because I was pretty sure I was going to lose them, and I'm still stand to that. So I thought we're only going to do a few that they're going to touch. But in the meantime, what we're going to do is we're going to do things the way we do in a traditional class, but I'm basically going to take the lead, and I'm going to guide them through each thing. So instead of having them do a KWL chart, something like this on their own, I typed for them, and they answered in the chat pod. I mean, there's so many different practices with, online learning, but I think at that point we just had them answer out loud, and I just typed their answers as we went. And then we just went through the whole thing. The entire thing, we did reading, we shared reading sections together. We did an Ed Puzzle video, which you're gonna hear us bring up over and over again. Ed Puzzle videos are interactive videos that stop and engage the students so they're able to answer questions, or you can add notes to it throughout. But we did the Ed Puzzle video together. It didn't go smoothly because I didn't know you were supposed to share your audio or share your computer audio. So we had to get creative to figure out how that was going to work, and we figured it out. We went through vocabulary, and then we went to an actual, what's called a formative, which this is another one that works very well on cell phones. But this formative is basically an assessment tool. It makes it easy to turn like a math worksheet into a digital worksheet within a matter of maybe 5 minutes. And then we read again, and then we did quizzes, which is like a game. This is where I sent them outside of the class. I tried twice to send them outside of our class. Quizzes, which is just game-based learning. It's fun. It's kind of like Kahoot, but it's a little bit different. It's more individualized. Didn't lose them there. I thought I was going to lose them. I didn't lose them there. I think I might have lost a couple, but we got them back. We finished our KWL chart. And then I did send them out on their own. I think Claire stayed with hers and kept them on Zoom because her lower level classes were a little bit less comfortable. But I did, and the nice thing was once they're on Actively Learn, I was able to provide feedback and see what they were doing while they were doing it. So I could continue basically engaging with the student during the lesson. And I'm gonna stop there. I'm wondering if we want to answer any questions yet, or if we want to wait to the end.
We can actually answer some questions. So we just had a couple of questions about, let's see, Tamari just asked, how did you schedule your virtual office hours?
I just set the schedule. So I did 2 afternoon times, I did 2 morning times, and I did 2 night or 1 night. So I had time every day, Monday through Friday, but I did use different hours just because of people's schedule. I wanted to try to offer something at all times. And then I just post, I do a lot of my communication with my students over Remind. So I would post those times and then the link to the Zoom site. And that's something, that was all that first, couple of weeks was just learning, how do I schedule a meeting? And Zoom actually has some great videos that they've done, little short videos that show how to do a lot of these things that you have questions about Zoom. So I would just schedule the time, and you can set up reoccurring meetings. So it's like if you're doing the same times every week, you don't have to schedule it every week. Just like you would set up a reoccurring event on your calendar. And then I would just send out the link to my students and anybody that needed to come. Usually I would have 1 or 2 during that time. So it was kind of a great time, just like if I was sitting in my office at school, I'm working on my lesson or working on things, and then a student shows up. Instead of showing up at the door to my office, they're just showing up on my computer in Zoom. And so then I could meet with them and cover things, and then they might stay 15 minutes, they might stay 30 minutes, depending on what they needed to go over.
Okay, and then I think one more question, and then we'll, I think, let you guys get back to your presentation, probably handle the rest of the questions at the end, is we've had a couple of questions come up that say you seem to be making a distinction between distance learning and remote learning. And just, could you talk, if you do see those differently, can you talk about what that difference is?
Yes, absolutely. Because this has come up a lot, because remote learning suddenly became a new term for us. Because distance learning, I'm the director of distance learning. I've done it for, I think, 3 years now. But I never did a live class on, because a live class is direct. So for Texas, I do always have to point that out. I don't know the rules for any other state. For Texas, direct learning is going to be when I'm with that student, right? I am live, we are here at the same exact time. In distance learning, they're on their own. They can work whenever they want, anytime, anywhere, whatever they want, but we're not together. I am not teaching them. They are on curriculum on their own. So for instance, go ahead.
So remote learning is synchronous. It's kind of everybody at the same time. Distance learning is asynchronous.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. And both have had interesting challenges and interesting results. Like, for instance, what I kind of anticipated happening, I thought my distance learning students might be interested in remote classes because they don't, I worry about them all the time. They're hard to keep because you have to keep that student motivated, and they're working 100% on their own. Most of our adult ed students don't do very well with that, though I have some that excel at that and get GEDs doing, or HSEs doing that. So it's kind of a combination, but not one of my distance learning students wanted to do the live classes. So that kind of surprised me. And most of my face-to-face students who actually were brave enough to get on the Zoom, they really like it. I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think it's easier for them because they can just turn on their phone and get on, and They don't have to drive anywhere. They don't have to worry about transportation issues or things like that. The classes are shorter. That was a lesson we had to learn early. We can't keep them on that screen for very long. We have to give them breaks after an hour. You don't want to hurt your eyes or anything else. Our classes can no longer last 3 hours. Now they're only going to be we're doing anywhere between 40 minutes and an hour and a half to 2 hours at the most. So it's been a lot, but anyway, I sidetracked there. But yeah, that's the biggest difference is distance learning. They're pretty much on their own. You still communicate with them, but you're not together. They do it on whenever they have time to do it, basically. Does that answer the question? Okay.
Yeah, I think that was really helpful for putting things in context.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. I understand.
Let's go ahead and let you guys get back to your presentation. We'll work on the rest of the questions at the end.
Okay, awesome. And I think it's back to Mary.
Okay, so now you're going to kind of hear a totally different experience. Sometimes Ashly, I love her because she has so many ideas. She has so many things. I've learned so much from her and working with her. But sometimes my head starts spinning when she has all these things, all these ideas. And so some of you may be feeling that same way of there's no way I can do what she just put up on the screen. There's no way that I'm at that point yet. And that was kind of where I was at the beginning of all of this is, I do a little bit of technology, but I don't do anything to this extent with my students. So how do I go from nothing to this? And so I had to kind of just in my mind say, what is going to work for me as a teacher? What am I going to do that's going to work, that I'm going to be comfortable with and confident with in reaching out to my students and offering them something in the virtual world? So my previous career before I got into teaching was in human resources. So I did a lot of presentations. And so I was familiar with PowerPoint and then Google Slides. And so I said, okay, I am comfortable with that. So I'm going to start making my, and I teach all 4 subjects for the HSE, but I primarily focus on math. And so when we said, hey, we're going to do actively learn, I was like, I have not ever used that in my class. I don't really know. I don't see that concept for a math class yet. I haven't gotten there yet. So I said, I'm just going to go with Google Slides. So I think Ashly's going to pull up my very first lesson, virtual lesson that I did. And we're not going to go through it, certainly, but just so that you can see, it was just a pretty basic lesson on ratios, rates, and proportions, where we went through kind of all those same stages that she has in her HyperDoc, where we talked about, you know, kind of where do you see this in the real world? And then I went through problems with them and explaining and the vocabulary and all of that. And then we went and I let them do problems where I gave them time to do the problem, and then we revealed the answer and then went over it. So again, it was a very simple one. I think I had 68 slides in my first one, which I know that sounds like a lot, but if you do a lot of, if you use a lot of slides, that really isn't that much. But I always end every lesson with assessments, a way for them to check their understanding. And that is, I use Go Formative, which is a website that Ashly has already mentioned, but it just allows me to take a math worksheet that I would give out in class for them to do or check their understanding of this. They can do it online, and then I can look at their answers and things like that. And so I end all of my lessons with something like that. So that went okay. I was like, okay, I can do this. But then I started saying, well, wait a minute. I have a lot of my students that can't come to class. So I decided, I usually taught twice a week for my in-class. And but my student schedule and everything was very crazy, and I would do a different lesson on Monday than on Wednesday. But I said, I cannot do 2 different lessons every week doing this. So I decided I'm going to do 1 math lesson a week, but I'm going to do it twice a week. So I do it in the evening and then I do it in the morning. So it hits hopefully most of my students with their schedule, so that it gives them the flexibility that if they're at work on one day, they can get it in the evening, or if the morning works better for them, they have that opportunity. But then I was realizing that I still had a lot of students that either couldn't come to the class or they didn't have the ability to get online, or whatever reason they couldn't join. So I decided, I'd heard Ashly talking about this thing called Edpuzzle. I'd never used it before, but she kept talking about it. So I went and explored Edpuzzle, and it allows you to take mostly videos that are already made and create a lesson by adding questions. But I said, well, what about if I just if I record my video lesson and then turn that into an interactive lesson? And so then I can give that to my students that don't have the ability, for whatever reason, to come to the actual Zoom lesson. So I started doing that, and I got hooked on that. So again, my first one that I did on Edpuzzle for that proportion ratios, rates and proportions, I think was 13 minutes long, the video was. So I just finished my 9th math lesson. That lesson that I just did had 220 slides in it. It was on probability. And my video for that was about 45 minutes long. So I've definitely expanded what I was doing, but that was a process, an evolution of just going to kind of putting these slides together, to walk through some problems, to really creating a whole lesson out of these that the students can interact with, and then being able to provide that my voice on a lesson video that they can interact with. And when they ask me questions about it, I know what they're talking about because I created the lesson and all of that stuff. But I was still kind of overwhelming my students with, I would send them the links to the slides, and then I would send them a link to the Edpuzzle video of the lesson, and then I would send them 3 to 5 links of all of the assessments that went along with the videos. And so it was kind of overwhelming, just all of the information that I was giving out to the students. So then I remembered Ashly saying something about this thing called Wakelet, which I had never heard about before. So then I kind of went and played around with that and realized that I could put all of this information that I was pulling together for my lessons in one link on a Wakelet that would allow them to access the videos, access the assessment tools that I was using, kind of give them more information. They could go back to it if I had any work spreadsheets, or like this one for the integer rules, they could go back and see those rules or print those rules out. They would always have a way to connect with me. So it was just easier for them to just get one link with all of the information versus multiple links and trying to keep up with it, and where's this and where's that, and I was having to resend a lot of things. And so that just helped me to organize it in a really easy fashion for my students to access. And now that can go out to all of my students. They can access it at any time, day or night, on the weekend. I also share it with all of my teachers at my organization, so they also have that accessible if they want to use that with their students. And so I started out very timid, very unsure, to now really evolving into this amazing way of reaching our students in a totally different way that I was used to. And I love my in-class time, and I'm ready to do that again, but I'll never stop doing this as well, because it's such a great way to connect with students that in a totally different way, at a different level. So I'm kind of sold on the whole virtual classroom at the same time.
Well, and the other thing is the things that she's made, yes, they took a long time to make. That I know that's probably going to come up, but the thing is we have them forever. So we now have these resources. We're putting them all together. We're sharing them. And of course, we're always willing to share with others, because if you're a technology person, that's what you want to do. But now they're available and they're there for us. And it really helps. Most of our students know Mary anyway. So it has been helpful, because I primarily teach like social studies and reading are my main things. I'm not a math superstar the way she is. So I can also share it with that student who's down to their last test. Hey, I need help with this. Well, now I have this additional resource that we can use in addition to, the Khan Academies and things like that, things out there.
And when I'm ready to go back and teach this lesson next year, I can just pull this up. I don't have to recreate anything, because it's already made for me when I have new students.
And then here's a big one for us. So we kind of talked about, we've kind of were handling students this way. In the beginning, we're like, okay, you have this option. You can work on one of our curriculum. And I got out there and I tried some free versions. We were currently using the curriculum called Edmentum. That's all I had for distance learning only students. But our other students, a lot of them had access to it as well. We gave them an option. They were like, hey, you can do this, and on your own, you can work on it. If you could even give us an hour a week, that would be great. Or you can start attending these Zoom classes. But then, of course, as we all know, we have the students that it was either the kids are overwhelming them, the kids are taking over the computers, if they have computers, there's no internet or slow internet, or internet got turned off. And I know everybody knows what I'm talking about. Multiple other things. A lot of our students live in the country. They just have bad service overall. And I've tried apps. I've gone out there and found Learning Upgrade has been a decision of mine, because I think that's probably been the most effective for a lot of my students, because cell phones are their life, not mine, but they are theirs. So I actually am going to use probably 3 different curriculums just for my distance learning next year. I'm just going to cut down the amounts that I was using before and split them up a little bit. So we're trying to meet the needs of everybody, but we were missing that very important group that doesn't have internet, that doesn't have technology. So we had, and we're very lucky, because we have a paper-based distance learning curriculum called GED Connect. The unfortunate thing is they are no longer selling this anymore. So we take advantage of it, and I really wish more developers would come up with some sort of a paper-based system for us to reach those students. So what we did was, I'm going to let Mary kind of talk about this, but basically what we did is we offered these paper packets to our students. And Mary, go ahead and take it.
Right, we just picked a location on site of our campus, and I did not do this, but we had some great people that created this map and a flyer so we could send it out to our students and let them know about what was happening, calling them. So we had, starting in April and up through this point now, we did 5 packet pickups, and we did it on different days, different times, until we kind of figured out when was the best time for people to come and pick them up. And it was all drive through, everybody's social distance. We had our masks and everything on as we were handing out our packets. We had extras. We tried to kind of schedule so we knew how many students were coming to pick up packets, but we always had extra if somebody showed up and they hadn't requested one. We also had a drop box so that they could return their packets anytime. They didn't have to wait. We started off at first like every week, but then we went to every 2 weeks because we were realizing it was taking longer for people to finish up their packets. So it just was a more efficient way of doing it. And so we had 90 different students pick up packets. Now, some of them picked up many packets, some of them only picked up one packet, but we had 90 students pick up packets, which was about 18 students per event that we had for pickup. And up to date, we had 186 distance learning hours earned through using our packets that had been returned, and all of the grading had been done. And through this all, it just allowed our students that couldn't connect with us through technology to still remain connected, to feel like we were thinking about them and concerned about them, and that they could continue to learn during this time as well.
Yeah, and it's very important because I use these packets for some of my distance learning only students anyway, but it's still so critical to stay in touch with them and don't forget about them, because I'm going to tell you, it's very easy to, when you don't have them in front of a report that I use for my basic curriculum, that I have to keep in my own spreadsheet just to keep track of those students. So now we're taking it from just distance learning students to just our normal students. It's been just a lot of just staying organized, I guess, and just making sure that we're checking in on them, because you know how they are. They might just pick something up and never do it at all. But I was just so blown away that we ended up with 186 distance learning hours just from the packets, which I really feel like there's a big need out there. And I'm going around begging people to come up with something to help us out that we could use for distance learning, but especially to help with our students during this time, but really all times, I feel like. And then just a couple of other things that we kind of wanted to mention. You know, it has been just one struggle after another, and I'm sure everybody feels that. And it's been frustrating, and it's been exhausting, and sometimes even rewarding. But, you know, we did try, when I first talked to Todd, we were in the process of trying enrollment. That was a big thing. We're like, how do we get the new students in? What are we going to do? I mean, it's one thing when we have the students know us, but having brand new students in this crazy world, and if they're not comfortable. So we did try to do enrollment. We did do enrollment on Zoom. So she took, the person who does our enrollment is just full of life. So she's used to it. She's a big time people person. So she was definitely great, and she loved being face to face, but she's suddenly in this situation on Zoom. So she was suddenly feeling like a teacher and knowing what we were going through. And she had to change things, because our real orientation, we play games and we do things to make it interesting. And she found that she didn't have that element anymore. So she was missing that. We did try to do something. This is before remote testing was quite available. We just wanted to get them, like, get a basic assessment of where the reading levels were at. Well, we already had our own tests that we had made, but we found that because the students, too many students didn't have the tech skills to understand our tests, and we were trying to make it simple, it was too complicated. So that didn't really work out. But she did go ahead with the orientation. We did do interviewing, and we finally, what we ended up doing once they opened up the campus a little bit, we finally have been able to test the students on campus using distance learning, you know. So that's what we ended up doing, because we absolutely couldn't do the testing. And we are having the new students start classes on Zoom, which is very challenging in itself. It's been surprisingly more challenging than I thought it was going to be. I think it's a lot of fear. I think it's already scary to start an adult ed class, but then you add this Zoom element to it, and I think it's even scarier. So what I have found is you have to reach out to them immediately, get on the phone, call them, and schedule immediately a Zoom meeting with them so that you can get them used to everything right off the bat, and just kind of share your screen, share what to expect, let them know, just kind of get them comfortable. But it's been a struggle. Like, I think I've had 4 new students, and I've managed to maintain 2, and I just can't get the other ones to talk to me. And then, of course, I'm just going to lead into this and let you take this last part, Mary, and this will be it for us. But the other thing is, I was comparing us to everybody else, because I do that. And of course, I was comparing us to people who were a little bit more advanced than we were, because they had some experience, and they had these schedules made and all these cool things. I'm like, we don't have a schedule. We're kind of a mess, because we were just having problems getting everybody on board with the classes. Some people could do it, but it was about technology skills in the end. I think the teachers with technology skills were making it work. The other ones had a lot of fear, and I really don't blame them. We tried to help them, but we got it together. We made it happen. And so, but we were trying to find a class schedule that worked, because the problem was the class schedule we had before was no longer working, especially for the daytime classes, because now the daytime students now had kids they were dealing with. So we had to come up with a class schedule. Boy, I was happy to have Mary's math mind in charge of that, because it hurt my brain. I had to get out of that meeting. But I'll let you go ahead and talk about that a little bit.
Well, when we first kind of started doing all of this, all of the teachers were picking their own times to do the class and what they thought was going to work. And it was kind of all over the board. So we kind of met and tried to come up with like standardized schedule that would meet the students' times when they were available, and we were all teaching on Tuesday night, and then so we were like, okay, we've got to like spread this out a little bit. So that was a whole process, and that we went through a lot of changes with that, trying to figure out the best times that would meet the majority of the students' needs that did want to come to a virtual classroom. We send that out weekly. We do a daily list to our students so that they can go to any teacher's class, not just their teacher's class, but any teacher's class that's offering a virtual class, so that they have access to everything that we're offering. We did, as crazy as this was, as far as we were completely isolated, but I felt like in so many ways this has brought us so much closer together as an organization, because we really did have to come together, help each other out. The teachers were pairing up and helping each other. One was teaching, one was moderating, and then they would switch off for another class. So there were a lot of things that we learned. We're still learning. We're looking at going back to face-to-face, but we definitely are going to keep this component as part of our organization, because we see the value to our students, not only just during this time, but going forward.
Yes, of anything, just kind of in closing this, if anything, it brought us all together. We spend more time together now than we ever did. We did not work on anything together. Now Mary and I are like playing teacher and student is what I call it. I'm like, hey, we got to try this, see how it works on the cell phone. Now, how does it work on the computer from the student side? Will this work? Is it too hard? Is it too challenging? Is this going to blow up in my face and I'm going to have a really bad night? Basically things like that. We're sharing all of our lessons. We're sharing all the resources that we make, because these things take a long time to make. And that's been our biggest challenge with it, which is why we teamed up and have decided to help each other. And basically, Mary kind of found this quote that I think kind of hits home for what's going on right now, but it basically says, one reason people resist change is because of they focus on what they have to give up instead of what they have to gain. And I will say that I feel that overall it's been really hard, yes, but we've definitely gained a lot as far as an organization and bringing our teachers and our staff members together. And that's what we have. So we're ready for any questions if there are any.
Okay, thank you very much, Ashly and Mary. And let me just say, we are at the top of the hour, so folks that have to go, please feel free to go, and know that we're going to continue recording. We're going to continue going through the questions that have been posted. We'll ask if you've got any last minute questions, please post them now so that we can make sure we go through everything, and can also be respectful of Mary and Ashly's time in sticking around and answering them. Thank you all for attending. For those of you who want to stick around and listen to the answers to the questions, you're free to do so. And just once again, thank you, and have a great weekend for those of you who have to leave. So now Ashly and Mary, me and Robin and Patty will kind of rotate through and ask the questions. And I'm going to start off with something you were kind of addressing there at the end. We had some questions about it, about your kind of your assessment and testing, and what you're using to kind of do assessment, and are you doing pre and post testing? And it sounded like you might have created your own assessment, or you might have been using something else. So can you kind of go into a little bit more detail about what you're doing with regard to both kind of initial assessment testing that you might use to place a student, and pre and post testing that you might use to measure and report gains?
Yeah. Well, for us, in the past, we were using TABE. We've moved away from that. And I'm talking about on the HSE side. We now use CASAs as our initial testing and our post-testing tool. That is our main one. For ESL, we use, at this time, we are still using Best Plus. I believe she's transitioning that to CASAs soon, is my understanding. But most of the teachers, we've created our own assessments and we've shared them. We like to use tools like what we've mentioned, Go Formative, because it's a great assessment tool and it's real time. So you can actually see what they're doing while they're doing it, and you can actually comment on them as they're doing it. Or, you know, if you're in the classroom, you can go kind of, if they're going the wrong direction, you can kind of help them. We try to do some sort of assessment at the end of each lesson, even if it means they're going to have to go do it on their own. Sometimes I even stay live with them while they're working on it if they want to, and so I'm there for them. We've also tried, I use Google Forms sometimes, just something quick, and I am talking about remote lessons, obviously, but there's also opportunity with things like Edpuzzle, because that has live assessment features as well if you have them do it on their own. So there's just so many tools out there, but those are the main ones that we use.
But during, and I don't know if this is what the question is really asking, during this time that we were shut down, we were not doing any like post-testing. We've only started doing that now that we've kind of slowly started opening back up. And we're doing that by appointment with all the social distancing and things like that. So I know there is the option to do kind of online testing, but we didn't ever really do that just because of the technology restrictions. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Ashly, but I didn't.
Our first moves, and this was coming from Anson Green, who's the director of Texas Workforce Commission. Our first move was just stay connected. He said, we're not going to learn it. We're throwing everything else out the door pretty much as far as assessment and those things and how that's stress and that sort of a thing. So we kind of just followed his lead, and our biggest thing was stay connected, stay connected, stay connected, stay connected. Have conversations, you know, and if we can get them in, and, you know, and we did. So we didn't worry so much. And I mean, we're just now, so, and in the beginning, I'm not gonna lie, my first 2 classes where we just hung out. Like, that's all we did. We hung out, we talked, we got used to Zoom. It was just me and my class, you know, the ones that would show up. And so that's like all we did in the beginning. And then we started to build the lessons as though we were in a real class. Is it the same? No, it's not, but we're trying to, one step at a time, make it better and better. I also noticed somebody had asked, there's 2 questions I saw in there that I noticed. Are the classes recorded? Sometimes we do. I mean, it's not like required or anything. We did go ahead, our company did go ahead and get us a couple of Zoom accounts that we share so that we could go over the 40 minutes for the free version. Sometimes we record them. It just depends on, it's your own choice. And somebody also asked what the ideal number of students. In my opinion, the ideal number of students, I like a big crowd, but that's me. But for me, the ideal number is the same ideal number in my face-to-face. I want to see about 15 to 20 students. If you have less than that, I don't know, I feel kind of sad when there's only like 4 or 5. You know, I'll do whatever, but that's just my opinion. The more I see, the more excited I get because they're taking their time to get there.
And it's a different dynamic depending on how many you have. You know, probably my biggest class has been 17 in a Zoom class. And I did a class with 2 students, and it was totally different. It was, you know, the same type of lesson, but you get to spend a lot more just one-on-one kind of individual time with the smaller group. It gets a little chaotic with the larger group, so you have to mute people more, or you have to, you know, make sure that everybody's getting a chance to participate. And all of my lessons that I record those with no students so I'm not recording the lessons that I'm doing with students. So I actually do my 2 lessons, and then I take just a day to kind of reflect on the lesson. If I need to make any changes or adjustments to make it more clear. And then I record myself on Zoom just with myself in the Zoom. So there's no interruptions, there's no conversation, nothing like that. So then I can just kind of go through the whole lesson, and then I put it in the Edpuzzle where I add in that time for questions and things like that that a student can do on their own.
Mary and Ashley, actually, I wanted to ask you a question that was posted on the chat many times, and eventually they posted in the Q&A, but there's a lot of questions regarding the packets. How were you able to assign the time? Because they want to know how you were able to calculate the 186 hours.
That's a good question.
Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, so it is a model that is on Texas Distance Learning Curriculum, but basically I can just tell you what it is. For each unit they complete, it equals 4 hours. So it's 4 hours. So that is, it needs to be 75% complete, and we do grade them. We do have our best practice is for it to be 75% accurate as well. So we do have somebody at the office who's taking the time to grade each one. But that's how the model is set up, and that's how it's approved. And this model is from a really long time ago. These packets are from a really long time ago, but they still work. And honestly, they're from the old GED test. But I particularly like the science and social studies because I have had students go through those packets and pass those tests just by using the packets. Now the reading and the math, I think, are a little bit, anything helps, but it's not going to get them to pass the tests as well.
And these are guidelines that are approved by the state of Texas. It's not like we just came up with it.
No, definitely not.
Okay, and then follow up to that one. I'm sorry, they just wanted to know if there's any chance of getting any take-home ESL packets as
well. The only thing I know about that is not enough probably, but I'm gonna say I think Burlington has some opportunities like that. But I'm not 100% sure. Burlington seems to offer a lot of things to ESL, but I'm not 100% sure. I have not come across too many. I think there might be one out there called Madison Heights, but ESL is not my specialty. So, and I actually have the ESL teacher kind of just takes over the Burlington distance learning section of it. So I'm not 100% sure. I have been trying to research to find anything out there that is more paper-based, but I'm pretty much failing at this point beyond what we have.
Tammy would like to know if you have students, if you have multi-level classes or groups, and if so, how you facilitate the learning for those multi-level groups.
And I think we've both Mary probably has gone through this even more because she's math, but we do, because right now I'm combined with my co-teacher, Claire. She has lower level students, reading level, so they're the ABE students, and I have students who are pretty high and almost done with their HSE tests. So we have, and it is complicated, it's difficult. So there's a lot of different things you can do. With Zoom, you can actually, if you need to, you can go into breakout rooms, which, but proceed with caution on that is all I'm gonna say, is because if you're gonna do it, you need to make sure a couple of things. You can't just send the students there by themselves and expect them to know what to do, because they're going to go, because it's happened to me as a participant in a webinar before. They said, okay, go to the breakout room, and then like, okay, then what? So if you're going to, and we have an ESL teacher who's in that exact situation, she's got 19 students who are showing up almost every day, and she has all levels, and she's like, what do I do? And I said, you have to have one of your students or somebody or a helper or something needs to go with them, and it has to be strong, and they have to tell them what they have to know, how to share their screen. They have to be leaders. I mean, there's a lot of complications that go with that. But if you have two teachers working together, or a volunteer or whatever you might have, one of them could go into the other room. So what we could do with Claire and I is I could go into my room and to go teach my class. It would be almost no different than being in our building where she's in one classroom and I'm in another one. We just proceed. We only have to use our one Zoom, and we can do it that way. So far, we've kind of liked teaching together. we're just trying to kind of keep it more middle ground, I guess, so far, because it is nice to have that extra voice with you for, you know, just to kind of fill in and to handle the technology issues and things like that. Do you have anything else to add to that, Mary?
Yeah, mine's you know, with math, what I try to do is when I'm introducing the concept, I start with simple examples or problems, but then I will always work up to more advanced using that same skill. So like, you know, maybe like order of operations, I might start out with a simple problem, but then by the end of the class, I'll be doing things that include exponents. I might even show something with like polynomials where you're like simplifying through order of operation or distributive property of multiplication. So I tell, you know, my students, listen, we're going to start off with simple problems so that we all are familiar with the concept. But even if you're not ready to do a complex problem or two, you're going to be exposed to it so that when it comes around later on, as you advance in the program, you'll have already seen this problem. You're not going to be as scared of it. You're going to know that you can do this by using the same skills that we used on our simple problem. And then, of course, my assessments, and I have 3 to 5 assessments for each lesson, and they start with the simplest problems and go up to more advanced problems using the same skill. So I differentiate through kind of taking them through that journey. So maybe at the beginning, my more advanced students might be like, oh, this is easy, but then they know they're going to get challenged at the end. And then my lower level students really get the concept at the beginning and then kind of have their mind blown at the end. But it's okay because they know they're not supposed to be there yet. And then the assessments give everybody their level that they're at to be able to check and see if they know how to do the concept.
Okay. I had a question. Just, do you have any policies on reaching out to students on your personal cell phones, or, you know, just kind of, I think policies in general, if you have students' cell phone numbers, if you're reaching out to them on yours. I think you said you use Remind to talk to or to communicate with a lot of your students. So do you have access to their phone numbers through Remind, or they just create an account and kind of join your
that's
group?
the great thing about Remind. And it's nice because a lot of the K through 12 systems use Remind as well, but it's a pretty, it's a confidential system. So a student, I can either invite them to join my class or they can join with a code that I give them. And so nobody sees anybody's numbers. I can send out like group announcements, but if they respond, I'm the only one that sees their response. The whole group doesn't see the response. So it's super confidential. People can't text each other or have access to each other's phone numbers or anything like that. So it's a nice way to be able to access and communicate with everybody, but it still be very confidential. And I know other people use different things, but that's just what I like.
Yeah, we've used pretty much, we decided last year as an entire organization that that all of us are going to use Remind. We even have a Remind group just for our staff members and for our GED or HSE teachers, because we're just finding it's just people weren't checking emails, and if you need to get that information right away. But we also do like announcements, congratulations, so-and-so passed their GED. I send it out to all my classes with a little fun little, you know, graphic or something like that. So it's also very motivational, but sometimes we do have to call a student. So if you're not comfortable calling, which I totally understand that, a lot of people are using Google Voice that creates a phone number for you. So it's not your phone number, and then they just call from there. I haven't used that myself, but we don't actually have a policy on on calling students. So we have access to all of their phone numbers, you know, on file, but mostly most students are really, really, really receptive to reminds. And yeah, and I know that WhatsApp came up a couple weeks ago on here. Most of us don't use WhatsApp. We're on Remind. We're just going to stick with what we know at this point, what we're comfortable with.
And there's lots of different things similar to Remind out there. You know, that's just the one that a lot of us were already using, and we just felt like it was meeting our needs the best. But I think as far as our organization, we leave it up to the teacher to decide whether they want to use their personal number or not, and
Okay, thanks for those answers. I have a question regarding the development of your lessons. I know that when we talked, you mentioned it took a long time to prepare them. So just to share with the audience, how long does it take you to develop the lessons that you have developed so far?
You want to go, Mary? I think, okay, across the board, and it's not just us. So the biggest challenge is you're creating technology, or you're trying to find technology, or you're trying to find content. For me, I'm going to say right off the bat, I'm an overachiever a little bit. I'm a little bit of a perfectionist when I'm making something, and it have to be just right. The biggest challenge for me is just the fact that I have to think so hard about, are they going to be able to see it? Is it going to work? Can they do it on their own? Things like that. I have spent easily anywhere between 10 to 15 hours on one lesson. I think on average, we're finding it's taking about 8 hours.
Yeah.
These are quality lessons. These are not ESL lessons, though I'm not saying ESL isn't quality, but there's a different thing on ESL. I think on ESL, my understanding is, I'm not an ESL teacher, but I studied it a little bit, would be that you're all seeing each other, right? You're probably on video, I'm assuming, and you're doing things the way you would in a live classroom. But we're not doing that. We're more just presenting our stuff. We keep our cameras off to save on bandwidth. And it's just creating these lessons. It takes a long time, which is the reason why I think it's so important that we save them and share them with each other, so that they can be reused and modified. I mean, change it to meet your needs. It's just the same thing with like a HyperDoc or anything like that. You use it to make your needs. It does take a long time, but I'm also going to say that it has always taken me a long time to make my lessons, because I really do try to create rich lessons. But like I said earlier, I would also use the whole month to work on that. It'd be more like a unit. And we're finding that we try to do things more at the most now. I might do 1 to 2 classes on one lesson. Mostly because you're getting a lot of new people coming in, and we don't know who's going to show up. So it's definitely, it's not my favorite part of this at all. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, as far as for me, I mean, again, like my last lesson that I did on probability, that was 220 slides. Now, that sounds like a lot, but it's really a lot of like duplicating and making one little change where something's moving, or you're highlighting something that you're talking about. So, but I would say it probably takes me a good 8 hours to do a really good lesson, a lesson that's going to keep the students engaged. And then again, I might teach it on a Tuesday night and say, oh boy, that section did not go the way that I thought it was going to go. So then I may make adjustments for my Wednesday morning class. And then I spend another hour recording myself on Zoom. And then I spend another probably 2 hours editing that video and putting it into Edpuzzle and adding my questions and things like that. So it is very time consuming. I feel drained. I feel like I've given birth after every lesson that I've created, because you do put so much of your time and energy into it. But it is something that is going to be available not only to me, my organization, but to anybody that wants to use it. So it's worth the time that I'm spending. But that's why I'm only doing 1 a week.
Todd, I'm not sure where our cutoff is here on questions. Do you want me to go ahead with another question?
No, honestly, I think that we've kind of answered all of the questions, except there's a few left that are basically just kind of asking, uh, can we get a copy of like your lesson plan form and things like that?
Yes.
So we'll kind of talk with Ashly and Mary and kind of get a collection of things they're willing to share and make sure of that. So thank you guys. You have been very generous with your time and your information. We really appreciate it. So thank you very much. Thank you to folks who stuck around and listened to all of the answers. And we'll see you again next week. Except for you, Ashly and Mary. You guys aren't presenting next week. But thanks for.
We might still show up.
Yeah.
We'd love to have you. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
You.